Okay, folks, sorry about that. The hold up there, we're having some technical issues with the internet, so we won't have a lot of different views, but we are live. Okay, folks, it's good to see each of you who are here, and we're glad to have those who joined us online. It's always good to be in God's house in midweek, just to come together and study the Word and pray together. A lot going on. Tonight at midnight we begin our 24 hours of prayer, and if you'd like to take an hour to pray, you can pick an hour, or if you want to contact Lisa Talley, she can help you find a slot that might need filling. And there's a prayer guide that's on the church Facebook group page, and we also can get you a physical copy of that if you'd like the prayer guide we like to use during that time. Also, we'll be having services Sunday. I think Saturday is the youth car wash. Does that sound right? Is it this? I'm sorry?
They moved that.
Oh, they moved it?
I think we're moving that into June.
Into June, okay. Okay, so I'm
Last
wrong.
time I looked at the calendar, it wasn't on Saturday anymore.
Okay, all right. Well, one thing that is coming up very soon is Graduate Sunday on May 21st. And if you or someone in your family is graduating, and this is for all graduates from preschool through college, graduate school, you pass these around, take one if you know somebody or you might need one, and then turn those in as soon as possible, because we're going to recognize graduates on the 21st. All right, we're going to go to the Lord in prayer. Certainly a lot of prayer concerns, but want us to bow together now and go to the Lord in prayer before we begin our study. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for another day of life, for another opportunity to be together in your house, to study your word, Lord, and we thank you for each one who's here. For those who've joined us online, we just pray, Father, that your Spirit would speak to each of us. Help us, Lord, as we grow in our walk with you, and just to be alert as to how you would have us serve and to be the kind of people you've called us to be. We love you, Lord, and we thank you for Jesus. For it's in his name we pray. Amen. Don't forget the grief support group, Grief Share, began Monday, and this coming Monday will be the first class. I think this past Monday was the organizational time, but it's 6 to 8. If you'd like to come be a part of that. Did y'all meet in the fellowship class?
We met here.
Or here?
Here, but next week we'll meet in the fellowship.
Okay, so to be in the fellowship class down first door on the right, going down the hallway. And hope you'll take advantage of that opportunity if that's something you would benefit from. We're looking at the 45th chapter of Genesis tonight. We have good coffee and we have decaf. So help yourself if you'd like some decaf, or if you'd like some good coffee.
I actually should have gotten regular because I'm praying at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
I'll have some after I get home.
There you go. Genesis 45. Our topic tonight is being a peacemaker. What are the principles for peacemaking? Occasionally, we all experience those unfortunate times when we might fall out of a relationship with someone. When it happens, what is our responsibility as Christians? Our responsibility as Christians is to work to restore relationships. Joseph didn't have a Bible, but he knew what he should do. And we see that in this chapter. There's a principle that Paul wrote about in Romans 12 and verse 18 that Joseph seemed to know pretty well. Somebody read for us Romans 12, verse 18. Uh-huh.
If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men.
Okay. As much as you possibly can, as you know, if it's possible at all, try to be at peace with everyone. Even people you disagree with. Even people you don't particularly enjoy being around. Be at peace with them at least. You know, that's the very least we can do. And so, at least on our part, doesn't mean they're going to reciprocate. Doesn't mean that they're interested in friendship or relationship. But it means that we're doing our part as Christians to be at peace with people. And that's exactly what Joseph does. And we'll see in this chapter, in the first 8 verses, we see the first thing he did was he allowed God time to work. And that's the principle that we need to learn. We can't force peace. We need to allow God time to work. As you recall, Judah, the eldest of Joseph's brothers, offered to stay behind in Egypt in place of the youngest brother, Benjamin. And that is probably more than anything what led Joseph to recognize that his brothers had indeed changed, that they had had a change of heart. And so he could no longer contain his emotions. And let's see what we read here. Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him. And he cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." No one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Does my father still live?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near to me." So they came near, and he said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt." Joseph cried so loudly that the people outside of the room heard him crying. And word got all the way to Pharaoh. Now this is the 3rd time that we know of that Joseph cried because of broken relationships in his family. His heart was broken over those relationships that had been strained. Now, he had no pleasure in deceiving his brothers, apparently, but he felt like he had to test them just to be sure they had truly changed. So it had been a long, hard 22 years total now since they sold him into slavery. If we want to be peacemakers, we need to allow God time to work. And not try to force peace on people. Not try to force resolution on people. If we wait on God, God will give us the opportunities to make resolution, to make reconciliation, to make peace. So we need to follow the example Joseph sets before us here. Wait on the Lord. For Joseph, it meant waiting 22 years total before he was able to even try to make peace and restore the relationship he had with his family. The psalmist records an example also in Psalm 130, verse 5. Psalm 130, verse 5. Somebody read that.
I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits, and in his words I put my hope.
Okay. I wait for the Lord. My whole being, my soul waits. In his words, I put my hope. And we try to fix things ourselves. Joseph says, I wait for the Lord and put my hope in his words. What a wonderful example that we see in Joseph as well as the psalmist. Joseph, after he let out his emotions, he asked his brothers an important question. He asked, is my father still alive? Now, if you recall, he had just recently asked them if his dad was still alive. But that was before they knew who he was. And so he wasn't sure. He wanted to confirm and make sure he hadn't died in the meantime, I guess. But he needed that reassurance. And after he asked the first time, the brothers couldn't even answer because they were so shocked, no doubt. But also, I think they were probably scared when he told them who he was, and they knew what they had done to him. They may have thought, he's going to kill us. He's going to have us executed. But the difference this time, this was the first time Joseph spoke to his brothers in Hebrew. Previously, we read that he had an interpreter speak to them each time. And so now he is speaking to them in Hebrew after the previous conversations when they didn't even think he could understand what they were saying amongst themselves. So he's now going to complete the task of peacemaking. He sees the perplexed look on his brothers' faces, and he tells them to come closer. Come near. And then he once again tells them, I'm your brother, the one you sold into slavery. And he reminds them that while the famine's been going on for 2 years, there's still 5 more years of famine to come. And 3 times in verses 5 through 8, Joseph tells them that God actually orchestrated all of this to save his family, to save their lives. Joseph tells his brothers that God has made him a father to Pharaoh. Now, what he's talking about is he's become a counselor, a mentor of sorts to Pharaoh and the ruler of Egypt, the governor. And the reason that Joseph can be so loving and forgiving is because he understands the purpose of God. Even when we're hurting, even when people do us wrong. Romans 8:28. Who can tell me what that says without looking it up?
All things work together for the good of those who believe.
All things work together for good to those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. So those who trust the Lord have been called by him. All things are not good, but they all work together for good. In God's timing, on his schedule. So no matter what happens, believing that in God's time, God will bring good from it, helps us to get through anything, helps us to deal with the pain that life throws our way, with the hurts that we suffer. And because of that, we can forgive others, knowing that God will take anything and find a way to bring about good from it. God will do his part, but we have to do our part. And I think one of the best ways we can see what that is to look to the words of Jesus in Luke 6:28. Luke 6:28. What does that say? Red letters. It means Jesus spoke these words.
Bless those who curse you and pray for those who spitefully use you.
Bless those who curse you. Bless. Eulogio is the word that's translated there from the Greek, or the Greek word that's translated into bless. It's the word from which we get our English word eulogy. And it means to speak well of someone. When someone says a eulogy at a funeral, they usually speak well of the person. It means to say good things about the person. And so, what Jesus is saying, in essence, if we translate it into modern day English, is we should only say and do good things to and about those who hurt us. That doesn't sound like what we should do, does it? Certainly doesn't sound like what comes naturally. Because naturally, we want, someone curses us, we want to at the very least, forget about them and completely ignore them. But to bless them means to say good about them or to them.
That goes along with revenge is mine, saith the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's the one who avenges. Absolutely. I'm sorry?
It says he will repay.
Yeah, he will repay. Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you can't let the law,
Mm-hmm.
you can't make a police report and let the law take action. It just means how you react personally.
Right. Yeah. You know, when laws are broken, yeah, we need to.
From the Lord anyway.
Pardon?
All the laws came from God.
No. Yeah. But that's a difficult one. Now, I can think of an exception to this rule. I think you know, if saying good about someone would cause other people to be hurt, say someone is an abuser or a pedophile, you know, and for us to say good about them might put other people in danger. So, you know, I think that's a reasonable, but I think there's always a way to find something good to say about most everybody, isn't there? It seems that too often we spend our time focusing on the negative. Nevertheless, if we would be peacemakers, we need to allow God time to work. Then we need to await opportunities to talk. Await opportunities to talk. We see this in verses 9 through 15. Hurry and go to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen. You shall be near to me, you and your children's children, your flocks and your herds, and all that you have. Do you sense the urgency in Joseph's words here? You know, he's missed 22 years with his father. He doesn't know what kind of health he's in. He's concerned that he won't get to spend much time with him. So he's saying, hurry, take care of this now. And then he says, there I'll provide for you, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty. For there are still 5 years of famine. And behold, your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see that it is my mouth that speaks to you. So you shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt and of all that you have seen, and you shall hurry and bring my father down here. Then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brothers and wept over them, and after that his brothers talked with him. You know, he wanted to really make the point that this was urgent. This was something that needed to be done. Yeah, there were 5 more years to endure, but this needed to be taken care of. It's been a long time since it happened, but he awaited for the right time. He waited until the Lord's time came for him to take care of this. 3 times, Joseph reminded them that God had sent him there. And then he said, you know, God has made me. God has, you know, what has happened to me is because God caused it to happen. He put me here. And, you know, sometimes our pains, our difficulties, our heartbreaks, sometimes those are the things that God can use best to make us who he wants us to be, or to use us to bless other people even. Joseph lets his brothers know that when they come back, they'll live in the land of Goshen, which was a very fertile area of northeastern Egypt. And Joseph would provide for their needs until the famine ends. He tells them that to let his father know what God has done by putting him in that position. Let him know all that they have seen. And he says, and hurry and bring my father down here. He keeps insisting that this is urgent, that they take care of this now. Once he waited, he saw that his brothers were for real, that they had a change of heart, and he sensed God's time in all of this. God put him in a position to have a great impact on his family. Then he got to work. He didn't waste any time after that. It was all about getting it done. And then we come to another of the most moving verses of the Bible, verse 14. Look at that again. Then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. Now, Benjamin was Joseph's youngest brother, but his only full brother, the only other child of his father and Rachel. Rachel was the wife that Jacob loved, and she was the one, she actually died giving birth to Benjamin. So this was important that Joseph let his brother, his full brother, know that he cared. And after he had embraced and wept with him, he hugged his other brothers. He kissed them. He wept over them. And after that, they were willing to talk to him after they saw that he had forgiven them. He didn't have to say he had forgiven them, but his love toward them showed them that they were forgiven. Now, when we give God time to work, we need to wait constructively for God to give us the right time to speak up, to talk to someone. It's easy to detect when someone is angry with you. Usually they don't want to talk to you. You ever notice that? People who used to talk to you, they stop talking to you. Usually there's a reason for that. And so, that's right. That's the case when someone's heart's not right towards you, whether it's your fault or not. So, it's usually a symptom of us being disobedient to one of the commands that Paul gives us in Ephesians chapter 4. Somebody look up Ephesians 4 and verse 31. This is not a suggestion.
Let all bitterness with wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice.
Okay? Let all bitterness, wrath, and anger, clamor, evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. It's impossible to be right with people when we harbor those kinds of hurtful feelings toward them, isn't it? We cannot have the kind of relationship God wants us to have with people. So, in order to be peacemakers, we have to deal with our own emotions. We have to deal with our own anger, our own bitterness. Sometimes we need to give God more time to work before our own hearts are where they should be, for us to be able to sit down and talk things out with someone. And one way that we know when our hearts are right is when we actually want to do that. We want to make things right. We want to sit down and talk to someone. And it's for the purpose of reconciliation. But if we try to rush things, we can actually make the situation worse. So allow God time to work and await opportunities to talk. And then there's a third thing we need to do in order to be peacemakers. And we find in verses 16 through 28, we need to anticipate God's blessings on our efforts to be peacemakers. Let's look at that. Now the report of it was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brothers have come. So it pleased Pharaoh and his servants well. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this, load your animals and depart, go to the land of Canaan, bring your father and your households and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. Now you are commanded, do this, take carts out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and your wives. Bring your father and come. Also do not be concerned about your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. Then the sons of Israel did so. And Joseph gave them carts according to the command of Pharaoh and gave them provisions for the journey. He gave to all of them, to each man, changes of garments. But to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. And he sent to his father these things: 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and food for his father for the journey. So he sent his brothers away. They departed, and he said to them, see that you do not become troubled along the way. You know what he meant? Don't quarrel. Don't quarrel, exactly. And then they went up out of Egypt, came to the land of Canaan, to Jacob their father, and they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart stood still, because he did not believe them. But when they told him all the words which Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts which Joseph had sent to him to carry him, the spirit of Jacob, their father, revived. Then Israel said, It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. So Pharaoh was glad to hear that Joseph's brothers had come and that there was reconciliation taking place. He saw it as an opportunity perhaps to repay Joseph for all that Joseph had done for him, for helping him prepare for the famine. And he tells them to return to Canaan and bring back their families. And he's going to make sure, as Pharaoh, that they have the best of everything. They don't even need to pack their stuff, because they're going to get better stuff when they get here. Kind of like heaven, right? So he tells them they're going to live off the fat of the land. And what that word fat means is the finest of what the land produces. The very finest. And he tells them that they can take with them some carts. Your version may say wagons. These were not little red wagons that you pull behind. They weren't even the kind of wagons that a horse would pull. These were chariots. These were the finest that the Pharaoh had to offer. And so when, Joseph heard all the words, or Jacob heard all the words of his sons, and he began to believe, but then it says he saw the carts. It's like seeing, a convoy of limousines drive up is what it amounted to for him. That they were going to be taken in style back to Egypt. These were the finest kind of chariots that existed in the world in that day. We would liken them to a Rolls Royce, perhaps, today. So they went to Egypt on foot, or perhaps riding on donkeys, and they would return their donkeys loaded with food. That was certainly what Jacob would have expected at the best outcome. But now, instead, there's a long line of limos coming to take all the family to Egypt. And Joseph followed Pharaoh's instructions. He gave his brothers everything they needed to make the journey. And he sent the donkeys to his father with provisions for the journey. But he reminded the brothers not to fight, not to quarrel. A lot of times, it seems that poverty draws people together. They come together, they work together. But then when there's excessive prosperity, that togetherness seems to vanish. Have you ever noticed that? You ever witnessed a family after the death of someone, family that you never imagined would not get along, and at that most difficult time for people, there's a split in the family over money or things? It happens all the time. I'm sorry?
Or both.
Or both, yeah. And it happens more often than not, I'm afraid, in my experience. More often than not. It's sad. But Joseph knew that truth. He knew that prosperity could ruin their relationships with each other. So he reminded them, don't fight. Don't argue. This is time to be happy, to be together. 1 Timothy 6:10 reminds us of this. Some of you might know it by heart.
For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows.
The love of money, not money, the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. And we see it all the time in people.
You know, I was thinking after what you said, you can, my experience is at the Haven, that families kind of cling together until they realize that the family member is not going to recover, but is terminal. That's when they begin to fall apart and begin to think about what I want versus.
Yeah.
But as long as there's hope, they're gonna live, they're right there.
Oh, yeah.
And it goes the other way.
Yeah. And they don't have to be gone yet.
Oh, no.
Most of the time they're not when it starts.
I usually say, now remember, they can hear everything you say.
Yeah.
That have to be so sorrowful for someone who's passing.
Yeah. And, you know, I've done funerals where people hired security and had law enforcement present because family was already fighting over stuff. And it used to shock me. It used to shock me. It doesn't anymore. It's sad. Very sad, yes. While Jacob's sons were in Egypt, he had been anxiously awaiting to see Benjamin and Simeon return. Can you imagine the joy he must have felt when he saw all of his sons come up? And he knew that because they were driving that latest model of Egyptian chariot, that something had changed. Something good had happened. They were carrying all kinds of provisions. Then they told him something he never expected to hear. Of everything he must have imagined at that moment, to hear that Joseph, 22 years later, was still alive and in a position of such power, it must have been just complete shock. They said, yeah, he's still alive. And he's governor over all of Egypt. He couldn't believe it. And they told him the things that Joseph had told them to tell. And the Bible says that his spirit revived. Think about that phrase. His spirit revived. So not only is he mentally and emotionally revived, he's spiritually revived because of this wonderful news that he got about his son Joseph. His spirit had been crushed. And if you notice there At the very end of this chapter, in verse 27, he's Jacob. But in verse 28, he's Israel. That's right. He is once again Israel. Israel means God rules. And he's living up to that now because his spirit has been revived. His decision to take his family up to Egypt was an easy one to make. And it also fulfilled God's prophecy. The prophecy that God had given to Abraham. That his descendants would be foreigners serving in a foreign land for 400 years. So in the land of Goshen, just as God had planned, they would multiply, they would not lose their identity as the 12 sons or 12 tribes of Israel. Exactly. This is a result of what Joseph did, because he remained faithful even in the hardest of times, even when life was beating him down. He exhibited godly wisdom, and so I look up James chapter 3 verses 17 and 18. This is a perfect example. Joseph is a perfect example of what we read about there.
Verse what?
17 and 18.
But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace.
Okay. So it's pure wisdom. It's peaceful wisdom. And the fruit of righteousness sown in peace by those who make peace. So it takes a wise person to seek peace rather than war. Peace rather than strife. So, in other words, the peacemakers will reap a harvest of proper relationships, not only with God, but with other people as well. You know, it's interesting. People will often say, you know, so-and-so, that person is so hard to get along with. That person is so mean. That person is so bitter. That person is so hard to get along with. Has anyone ever said that to you about someone and then you found out they were the nicest person you ever met? What I've discovered is that usually the people making those statements are the ones who are bitter and angry and who don't try to be peacemakers. But when we seek to be peaceful people and make peace with other people, we can see the good in them. We don't just see the negative, but we can see God in them. And we can actually live with them and in peace and get along with them. We don't have to like everything they do. We don't have to agree with everything they think or say, but we can have peace with them. Allow God time to work, await opportunities to talk, and anticipate God's blessings on your efforts, because He will, in fact, bless your efforts to make peace. Other thoughts?
We have to remember, though, that if our efforts to be peacemakers are rejected, We just need to accept the fact that we've made peace with God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes it's all one-sided. And we can't,
Dustin, is that when you keep the dust off your sandals and
yeah.
go on?
Yeah, I think there comes a point we have to, sure.
Well, most of you in here at one time or another have prayed with me about my lack of a relationship with my grandson since my son died. And it's in the legal system and it is grinding very, very slowly. But I have had, for my own self, I've had to just say, God, you do this. I can't.
Yeah.
But I can't. And, it's not what I wanted by any means, but it's the only way I could have any satisfaction.
Well, and we certainly continue to pray
Please.
for that situation for
I
Luke
believe
and for
he
you.
has a resolution, but it's not here yet.
And what we do know is that Luke knows.
Yes,
He knows you love him.
he does.
He knows,
That was our last conversation.
yeah. He knows, and there'll be a day when he's able to make
That's true.
choices on his own.
Every day he's another day older.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Any others? If not, we'll say goodbye to those who've joined us online. We're glad that you could be with us tonight. Hope that you've gotten a blessing from this lesson and that you will join us next time. Next Wednesday night, we'll be back in person. We'd love to see you here. If you can't make it, we'll see you online. Sunday morning, 10 a.m. Sunday school, 11 a.m. worship. Again, we'll be here live. And if you cannot be here physically, join us online. Good night.